right. Amazing. So good to be here. Hi, everyone. I'm extremely excited to be here. I've heard it's the first time that we have two designers on stage, so I think we shouldn't fuck it up.
Yes.
I'm Felix. I'm with Lovable. I joined as an early investor, and then I was one of the first designers. Been with the company pretty much the whole year, and it's pretty exciting time right now. And I'm here with Miklu, and you're currently Chief Design Officer at Oura. You've worked with some of the most incredible designers in the world, including Johnny Ive at Apple, and then Airbnb. You've also been a founder multiple times, so couldn't be more excited to share the stage with you and talk about how design is evolving in an age of AI.
Feeling is absolutely mutual. You guys have had a little bit of a year, so congratulations and excited to dig in.
Thank you so much. Why don't we? I think you've been longer than I have, been in the whole design atmosphere and design space. What were some of the things you've learned also at Apple back in the days, and you think are still true in today's world where AI is obviously playing a huge role when it comes to design and building design teams?
I think there are some things that are universal, and perhaps the main lessons from Apple is just that when you have remarkable people that are fully dedicated on building something wonderful, a lot of good things happen. I definitely learned focus, I learned simplicity, I learned ownership. I think ownership is a big theme in startups and in that sort of founder DNA. And perhaps also worth remembering that when the sort of, let's say, startup culture was invented, the OG startup culture was the culture at Apple that Steve drove. So even though Apple grew up to be one of the bigger companies, it was definitely built with founder energy and kind of startup DNA, and those are some of the things that I carry with me every day. And I guess I've always been very grateful for that lesson, because in the end, it's those lessons that we learn from other humans that let us do the things that we do today.
Yeah, I love how you talk about ownership and thinking about urgency. I feel like something that we see a lot at Lovable also is everyone is so so onto this mission of building something and designing something, and I feel like it's pretty unique that you need this entrepreneurial mindset even as a designer.
Yes.
To kind of keep focus and truly figure out what is it you're trying to build, and obviously the role of design is changing a lot, right? If I look back at the days when I started designing, I compare that with how we do design today, crazy difference.
Yeah.
What are some of the major differences that you see? You come from industrial design, but now at Oura you combine both, right? Industrial plus kind of software design.
Yeah, I think a lot of being a good designer is the ability to zoom out further than anybody else and zoom out deeper into the details than anybody else, and then to be able to change the angle of how you observe the problem. And as long as you can keep it integrated, then you have a pretty comprehensive understanding of how to move things forward. And I definitely often use principles learned from software design on hardware design and the other way around. And we were chatting a little bit on the background, what are the biggest themes in terms of AI? I think it's just that incredible sense of agency when you can prototype and learn so fast. In some ways, the AI just has so much experience because it can practice a million times when you can practice a few times. And oftentimes we also build these underappreciated rules of this is how an app works. And even though AI is building its understanding of what to produce from data that humans initially created, it tends to get stuff wrong in really interesting ways, which then by reflection shows you that I was actually thinking about this differently. The buttons can be twice as big, or there can be much more data density here. And you realize that unconsciously we've been all looking at the app design the same way for 10 years, and AI can be one way in which you really open that aperture and do something different.
I guess what I'm most excited about thinking about AI and combining design and AI is we have new tools to play with, right? I think design has always been a lot about you want to play, you want to experiment, you want to go incredibly bold and then basically take a step back and reduce. And we talked about that, right? There's a whole idea of when you try to come up with something new, it's a lot about just going into every single direction first and getting a sense of what is it like, what does it feel like, and then taking a step backwards from there and kind of trying to reduce it to the most minimal version possible. And what I find exciting is that AI is basically enabling that. Because with AI, it is so easy these days to just put something out there, right? I mean, you can build a website, you can build an app, you can build a product really in minutes or hours. And that brings up new challenges, which we can talk about in a second. But the whole idea of we now have these tools to experiment and explore so many of our ideas in a real world environment, I mean, that has been a big change for me.
I mean, startups and all companies are ultimately learning machines, and I think it's a really good way of thinking about what you build in terms of your team. You're trying to build a container of both people, facilities, tools to learn as fast and as impactfully as you can, and AI is definitely the multiplier of all multipliers in terms of technology, at least during our lifetimes.
How are you balancing that at Oura when it comes to experimentation? Because with software design, it's easy, right? You just you do A, B, C, D, and you see what works best, and you just pivot. But I feel with physical design, you can't just quickly create something and then pivot, because it just takes so much more time. Are you more intentional, or what's the?
I think intention is very important with everything we do. Oura's mission is to make health a daily practice, which to me is almost like a sacred undertaking, something that makes you really feel like you serve something much bigger than you, and you should do your very best to be impactful in that sense. That's how I would frame it.
Maybe a follow-up question on this, or something we should maybe talk about a little bit, is how we are thinking about building design teams. Because the design output you create, that's the one thing, right? But I feel the output is very much defined by how you're building a company, in terms of who are the people you're spending time with, how are you building your team, I mean, I had that realization also early at Lovable. I think the people that were there also in the early days, everyone was incredibly curious. Everyone has this urgency to try something new. Bold ideas weren't be pushed away, but actually being considered and tried out. So how are you thinking about building design teams? I mean, you've done it a lot.
It's definitely the favorite part of my job. It is to sort of recognize certain attributes in people and give them a shared direction, and be clear about operating principles, what are the core ways in which we act our values in the daily practice. I also done this a few times, where you start with a small team and the company's growing, and you start to fundamentally shift the capability of the team. So first you kind of build a core. You have to have the confidence that you have the sort of base tools to go do the acts of design in the different axes, which for us it's industrial design or hardware design, it's interaction design, and it's software design. But once you have the core basics together, you should start stretching the dynamic. You should almost aspire to hire the most diverse personalities and the most diverse talent that can possibly be held together to common goal. So this year we've been able to hire the most amazing data visualization person, for example, who's now going to be able to not only train all of us on how to do data visualization in the most meaningful and concise way, but at that axis of excellence. And I always say that within the make health a daily practice, my responsibility is to make creative excellence a daily practice at Oura.
I love that. Can you share some more examples how are you enabling creativity in your team?
Ultimately, like I love to play with like different definitions for design, and one of them is like wasting time for good results, which is like hard to explain to more numbers or metrics defined people. Like what's the value of like a great idea that usually doesn't necessarily arrive on schedule. Like it's harder to predict. So a lot of what I do is like I create the container and the conditions for great design and great ideas to be somewhat inevitable. And in this modern workday, it means that we have to carve out time, including being bored together. So every morning from when we get to the office to lunchtime, we basically have what we call design meetings, which is the whole team designing on a different topic together. And I think that container is incredibly valuable because it also creates the space for us to just mull on a problem or be a little bit disconnected. And the best meetings usually are where you kind of run out of steam and there's a certain almost frustration that no good work is coming out, and then an hour passes and somebody's like, what if we did it like this? And then you sense this little sparkle of energy, and yeah, we could do that and we could do that, and soon lunchtime has gone because people have been so mesmerized by now this idea, and it's still fragile, it's still something that needs quite a bit of protection, but now at least our team is sort of rallied around it, and then it's our job to go help the rest of the company with that. And maybe one also really concrete thing to take away that could be helpful in your startup, or if you're an investor in how you assess the design team's function, is that in some ways the role of design is to inspire and clarify the company's future here and now. So what we really try and do is to, at any time, to be able to present some spark of value, clarity, and inspiration about where we are going. So be it the board of directors or the CEO, they can come to the studio and they can get a sense of like, this is where we are going as a company. This is what it feels like. This is what it looks like. And these are some of the broader themes of how these things would look like, actually work like.
Yeah, I love that so much. It's like design is almost like a way of manifesting where you're going. It's building your vision, designing your vision, but in a visual way, in an expressive, communicative way.
Correct.
I love that a lot. I want to talk a little bit more about, I think we have a bunch of founders and investors here in the room, and I was previously working with Creandum and helped a bunch of their portfolio companies hire designers. And I think I've always get asked a lot, when is the perfect time to bring in a designer into like a company?
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about, I guess, design as a foundational role in companies, even at a very early point of time. And then, how to scale and grow teams. Yeah. But why don't we start with, when do you think is the perfect time, to bring in a designer?
From my perspective, which is entirely unbiased, the best companies are ultimately three things coming together. They're business, the technology, and the artistry. And since you need all three, like you better have an artist in residence from as much the beginning as possible. And I just watched this beautiful interview by Steve about the early days of Pixar that was released on Pixar's birthday, and he made this comment that no amount of technology will rescue a bad story. So all startups, to me, the founding energy is about telling a story about the future. And I think the designers can be a really powerful part of you being able to tell that story again in a clear and kind of inspiring manner. So I definitely believe designers should participate from the beginning. And actually one of my sort of current life goals is to make sure that there are more designers as founders and designers as investors and designers generally supporting the building of the future in instances like Slush.
Yeah. At the end of the day, the way I think about it is, your job as a designer is to fundamentally understand your user and your customer and making decisions based on that. And I feel like we as founders, we quickly tend to, just put ourselves into a new feature or, like a new idea that we want to pursue. But it's so important, even especially in the early days of a company, to truly take time and figure out what is it that is even worth building. Especially thinking about kind of what AI is enabling us to do, right? I mean, building a software product has never been easier. Yeah. You can open apps like Lovable and you can just build something yourself. But then the fundamental question, I think, is what is it that's worth building? What is it you shouldn't build? And that becomes the tricky question. And I feel like, an advantage coming from a design point of view is answering that question, coming
Correct.
from the user perspective.
Yeah. And I couldn't agree more. I think there's like a relatively superficial but equally important layer of understanding that and a deeper one. So I think as a designer, your job is, it revolves to a degree around taste. And I think taste is increasingly important in the age of AI because at the end of the day, AI is also compiling its delivery out of like a broad set of data and whatever prompt you have given it, which is bringing the peak taste and the bottom taste to some sort of median level. So I think designers superficially, I say superficially, but it's like completely legit and important part of the industry, right? Like making something beautiful is genuinely valuable. So it's the layer of taste, and then I think the deeper layer is a layer of compassion, and not just empathy. Like it's not just about being able to understand the human experience and how your customers are struggling with their day-to-day, and how can we help them do better in the axis that the company operates. And compassion is like empathy, but with this like genuine agency to actually help, to serve, to improve things.
Talking about taste, that's a huge topic. How do you think everyone has taste, right? It's not only designers, everyone has taste, founders, everyone building something. Yeah. At the end of the day, what you build is, by building something, you're basically expressing your taste. How do you think you can develop your own taste over time? What are certain ways to practice? Because I agree, right? It will be having strong taste in today's world.
Yes,
is the differentiator.
Yeah.
Because you need to stand out, and you do so by being opinionated about things.
Yes. Yeah, to me, a lot of it is intuition that, I think we can both relate to, like, at an early age, we wanted to create, and we intuitively recognize certain things as mesmerizing and other things less so. And, we're the kind of people who find the backstage much more exciting than the front of the stage. And, the way the kit that is deployed there has been packaged is like captivating, and it drives your ideas about, like, let's say, packaging of future rings. But taste is something that can be trained. Taste is something that exists in culture. Sometimes I think that culture is almost like the first super intelligence that happened. That, in some ways, culture is quite similar to AI. So it's a system of collective intelligence that tells us to act in certain ways. And some people are more sensitized and curious and equipped to follow their intuition. And intuition then, on the other hand, is so related to the ability to make something that's genuinely new, that if you don't have the kind of bravery to connect things in a new way and then say, this isn't the collective taste yet, but it will become the collective taste because my intuition says this is really exciting, and I have the confidence that after doing it a few times, that when I put something together with great care, the intuition translates to other people saying, hey, that's a little bit different, but I really, really like it, and I can't quite name why. And you get closer with it, and you start to use it, and then kind of fall in love with that. And enough time goes, and then that becomes the culture again, and it becomes the mainstream. So I think that's how we contribute. And to leave that part out when you start a startup is very limited in my perspective.
Very, very interesting. Yeah, taste is it's an interesting question. I guess the way I look at it is also, to me, it's always been a lot about exploring what's possible in a way. I feel like taste you develop over running multiple experiments, trying things out, and then seeing kind of what is it you like or dislike, and then you take it from there.
Yeah.
If we think about what is true for design today, that has always been true. Also back in the days, when you worked at Apple, Airbnb, or even ran your own companies.
Yeah.
What are some of the things maybe for the non-designers but also designers out there where you say this will always be true?
Yeah.
No matter what you're designing, whether we're living in an age of AI, these are the fundamental principles that you should always be kind of going back to.
Yeah. Let me take this all the way then to the beginning, or like at the highest level of what I think is most important in companies. Effectively boils down to two things: this building relationships and making decisions. Decisions being some kind of allocation of resources, like that's what you are ultimately doing, and then I will come to creativity, which is like what every single person in the company is on the hook for delivering to a degree, but perhaps designers have even heightened kind of contribution around this idea of creativity. And if you then think of relationships or you think of decision making, creativity is a multiplier for both. So that's kind of maybe at the most universal philosophical level what I think is the contribution that we can be
I love
making.
that. I love that.
Yeah.
I would maybe add, I feel like, in my job, I'm sitting in front of a computer pretty much the whole day, and I love it, but I also hate it.
Yes.
I think what I realized for myself as a design principle is that I always want to keep, as long as we're designing for humans, is this whole idea of, yes, we're using AI, we're using different kinds of technologies, and our jobs are changing, right? I mean, our jobs as designers completely changed over the past few years. I'm using AI pretty much every day for anything, right? Is it like, whether it's setting up user tests or challenging me on UX copy, it could be anything. But I feel like one thing that stays true, and that is at the end of the day, you're designing something for a human. And so you want to make sure that you're not being distracted too much by what AI is telling you is right, but by focusing and believing in your own instinct and gut. Because, at the end of the day, I feel like there will be times where we will design for machines, but the same is true for B2B or consumer. It doesn't matter. If your target audience, is at the end of the day, it's a human, right? And so we should always have this like human interaction and communication loop in our kind of design process.
Totally.
I don't believe we can automate that.
No. Beautifully said, and I would maybe conclude it that, ultimately boils down to wisdom, which is, philosophically, or like philosophy is one of my favorite words because it actually stands for love of wisdom. So, and wisdom is a deductive practice. It's like deeply understanding the condition of being a human and being alive and interacting like we are here. And that's like one of those eternal commitments, and I think it's a commitment that's increasingly important as the technology gets more and more omnipotent. So in some ways, as we go forward in technology, we should go backwards in our understanding of the certain fractures that have happened around our humanity. And once again, I think it's the role of the design team to champion some of those thoughts.
Exciting times ahead. All right on time. Thank you so much for joining us in our discussion, and hopefully
have a fantastic Slush.
See you later.